Hello, my name is Tiffany Velati, and I have decided to go ahead and share my story, my life story, because I believe that all the trials that I went through, other people can relate to and maybe need to hear somebody else's story to liberate them. So I'll just go ahead and start from my childhood. My parents met, and my mother got pregnant with me before I was even born. My father left her, which obviously, like, hello, that sucks, you know. And my mother, she grew up with like a schizophrenic father, like mentally ill, and he like drove her mother to like just mental illness. And so my mother, when she had me, it was like my father left her and here I come. And to her, it was like I represented him. And she treated me that way. She treated me very narcissistic. They say, talk about narcissistic mothers. That's exactly what she did to me. She was very narcissistic. I don't know whether or not to say it was both covert and overt. She would do it loudly, and then she would do it like undercover. So then my mother meets my stepfather, who is in the military, and he is stationed in Germany. And the day that I met him, I remember him coming up my great-grandmother's driveway and being like, oh God, like he was in full gear, his military uniform, and he like saluted us, and we were like, okay, bro, like bring it down. Like, what are you doing, you know? And immediately, I mean, I was two years old, and I knew at the age of 2, I mean, I have flashes of this. I have remembrance of this, that this guy is a psychopath. And I could see it clear as day. And then I could see my mother. I remember walking into my great-grandparents' house and going to the room where she stayed and seeing she had her engagement ring on and being like, oh no. Like, oh no. And I could see it, even at 2, which they, anyone that believes that like a 2-year-old or a child does not see, you're extremely wrong. Excuse me, let me like pull that back. Children, I knew, like I literally knew, I could see it, that he was a narcissist. I could see that he was like psychopath. Just the way he like conducted himself. And my mother I could tell she was a love addict. I could tell she was like under his spell. But yet at the same time at that point she really became narcissistic toward me. And they got married, but I was supposed to be the flower girl. And 3 hours before the wedding, I remember hiding behind some bushes, and I can remember I literally have the image in my head of crouching down outside my great-grandmother's house behind bushes, and I remember there being like a search party for me. And then my great-grandmother told me this, I don't remember it. I have like kind of a brief image of it, but she said she walked, somehow I like left the bush and walked into their garage, and I was hiding behind boxes, like just trying to hide away. And my great-grandmother even confirmed that when I got older, and she said she went into the garage and heard like me like behind the boxes. So it was clear. Even to a child, I must repeat, it is clear to them, even at a young age, we sense that something is wrong. And so they got married. I refused to be the flower girl, and they got one of his nieces to be the flower girl, and they got married. And we went to Germany. And at that point, my mother had him start to potty train me, which I remember clearly being in his office, and I remember saying, "Mommy, I have to go to the bathroom," and her saying, "Tom, like, take her." And he would watch me. And then I remember saying, "I can't go." And I remember him grabbing me and ripping me literally off the toilet seat and just beating me for it. And which is already abuse, because the mother, why are you allowing a grown man to potty train your young daughter? Like, that's no. If I were a mother, no. And so by that time I started to go to the bathroom in my pants because I was like, oh my God. I remember thinking I have to go to the bathroom, and I'm only 2.5 at this point. And I'm like, oh my God, I have to go to the bathroom, but I don't know that I should say anything because I might get beat for not going then. And I remember I started to hide under a table and the kitchen table and go in my pants. And then at that point, I remember my mother became abusive, and she would beat me for going in my pants. But it was like, look, you're telling your child two different things. Like, you can tell us you have to go to the bathroom, but then we're gonna like grill you, we're gonna like scare you out of it and then beat you. So no matter what I did, it was like I was wrong. And apparently, because of a letter my mother wrote later, she said they took me to a priest, which I don't remember, and a psychiatrist, and told them the issue. And apparently both of them said she's severely homesick. You need to send her home to her father. And so they sent me back on literally a jet plane to cross Germany to the United States all by myself at the age of 3 by now. And wow. Hold on, I'm just going to fix that. All I remember is I can remember the flight attendants being like trying to comfort me and like give me headphones to watch a movie. But like I knew they were like, this poor little girl, like why is she flying by herself at this young age? And so I remember walking through the next like flashback is walking through the tunnel that you exit off of, and there were like these misted mirrors, and I remember seeing my dad and then like my new stepmother, who he left my mother for, like coming through. And I have a picture. I literally have a picture in storage of running into my father's arms, and I remember that. And somebody took a picture, and my like legs are wrapped around him, and I'm holding his face, and we're like kissing. I'm kissing him. So I was clearly traumatized. At that point, fast forward several years later, my stepmother, my dad, I don't know which way to go. My stepmother would take me, I remember her taking me to this apartment building, and it was filled with a bunch of guys without my father knowing. And this one guy made some kind of like shell, like some kind of pottery for me. And apparently, I remember throwing it across the room, suspecting, like as a young child, I like suspected something. And she disappeared in a room with him. And then she told me that Christmas Eve, she told me, I'm not going to be there tonight because our thing was open a couple presents on Christmas Eve. And she's like, I'm not going to be there tonight. I need you to tell your father I'm leaving him. And so I'm like 5 at this point. And I tell my dad, and I remember him saying like, yeah, okay, really? Like, she would tell you to tell me, like, not believing me. And that night, I have a clear vision. My grandparents came. There was a tree in the living room, and we had certain presents picked out, and she never showed up. And my dad's like pacing. And then I remember him sitting down once he realized, like, she's not coming. And putting his head in his hands, and like, I'm like, I told you. But he didn't want to hear it, and then he realized it. And that was very difficult for a young child to see that. I keep saying, So, at the same time as that was going on, they had like split custody, and my dad, they moved to Boston. He was stationed, my stepdad, to Boston and in the Air Force, and we would drive halfway and meet at a McDonald's. And this, I won't call him a bad name, but this guy was dressed in his fatigues. He was dressed up, ready. And we would pull into McDonald's, and he was like saluting us. And it was like a pride thing for him. And we were like, oh my God, like, what? Like, this guy's psycho. Like, my dad and I both felt that vibe. Like, what is wrong with him? Like, you're meeting your stepdaughter. What are you doing? And so I would go to Boston every summer. At that point, every summer and Christmas, it was summer and Christmases. And at that point, eventually, one time I remember my stepfather babysitting me when my mother, she would work part-time as a nurse, and my stepfather would babysit me. And one time, apparently, like, I talked about my father too much. And she got home, and he chased my stepfather chased my mother up and down and up and down in the basement over and over. And I could hear, like, slaps. I could hear her, like, yell out. And just being like, oh my God. And I'm sitting there as, like, 6 years old, and I'm sitting on this like blue velvet couch, and I'm like, okay, I think what's wrong? I didn't get it. And she comes to me and says, you can never talk about your father like that ever again. I'll call him, or I'll just say stepfather. Your stepfather said you talk about your father too much. And at the time, I'm like a little girl, and I'm trying to like understand these adult issues. And I'm like, okay, I have to shut my mouth. And so I knew, like, wow, this guy's beating my mom up. I have to shut up. Like, this is bad. And I have to shrink myself. So my childhood is like lost at this point, you know, because I'm like walking on eggshells for this guy and my mother. And so eventually, I'm trying to think what happened. Eventually, my dad is on the other side. My dad is going through women and dating these women, and then like not dating them anymore and dating another woman. And I could tell my dad was also a love addict, the same as my mother. And my dad's like desperately trying to find a new wife. And every time he would get a girlfriend, it was like I was on the back burner, period. Like, I was nothing at that point. And, oh man, he would just, I basically feel like I raised myself. At one point, he dated a woman that he would leave, and she would babysit, and I would do anything, and she would be like, go to the corner. Go to the corner. And I'm like, okay. Oh, sorry. And then she would say my name and be like, hey, Tiffany. And I would turn around and go, yeah? And I remember her clear as day going, you turned around. That's another 30 minutes. And I'm like, what? Like, or if I bent my knees, it was like, oh, that's another 30 minutes. Like, you need to stand up straight. So I'm dealing with that. And in the meantime, I'm flying. They moved to Arizona. Eventually, they had a boy. Then they moved to Arizona. They had twins, 2 boys. And I'm flying by myself, literally by myself, alone, to all these states. And I flew to Arizona. And I remember being grateful for that. But then to see my mom, and where I was getting to fly to, and being like, wow, this is amazing. It's so warm here. But at the same time being terrified of my father, or my stepfather. And at that point, I can say my mother, like I said, she's part-time was a nurse. She started modeling at that time, but only part-time. But when she would leave, my stepfather would babysit, and got really weird. It got really weird. He would, one time I was going to the bathroom, and he busted in with a camera, and I stood up. There's I have the picture. I own it. So legally, like, he could get in a lot of trouble, but it's me covering, like, my vagina area as a child, and he's like, ha ha, he's like laughing about it maniacally, like, disgusting, and would try to humiliate me. And so he would play monster, and he would put me upside down inside of a hamper at one point. Another thing he did was play monster on all fours and bang his head and growl. He was growling, literally growling, and banging his head into my private area. And this was before puberty. And so my mother comes home eventually we took a bath together, and she saw a black and blue mark and was like, what's that from? And I'm like, I don't know, like, not telling you. And they would force me to, like, make up a story, because my dad was dark featured and my stepfather was more lighter. And when they would introduce me to, so I even experienced racism being Italian. I know that might sound silly, but they were like, oh, just say, he's your father, and just, like, they were really scared of what people would think. And so, at that point, I would just be happy to be with my mother all day, every day. And then as soon as my stepdad came home, it was bad. And so eventually, then I go back to my father, and then he's dating a different woman, and she's a huge, raging, crazy, mean, nasty woman. And, like, at that point, my mother came to visit with my stepfather to his parents' farmland, which was 2 towns over from where I grew up in Hershey, Pennsylvania. And I remember I knew my mother wanted me to meet with her that day. And I told my dad, I said, Dad, I do not want to go. I do not want to go. And he's like, Tiffany, if you don't go, they're going to show up to my work, Pizza Hut, and it's going to be a problem. And I'm like, oh God, like, and she called, and I'm just with my dad's fiance or girlfriend at the time. And she like I was like telling her, I don't feel comfortable going with you. And then like pulling the phone away and like covering it and like looking at my dad's girlfriend. We're like, oh my God, what? And she like heard that and thought, you're laughing at me. And so the next thing I knew, we hear banging on the door as if it was going to be kicked down. Literally. It was that bad. And my stepmother was like, bang back. And I'm like, no, you bang back. Like, so I'm like a child, and these adults are like putting me in the middle. And so that's creating codependency. That's creating people pleasing inside of me. And that's grooming me for my adulthood to be like a people pleaser and a codependent who's always trying to make everyone around me happy. And eventually we ran upstairs and we called my grandmother, and they left outside the door. They left, and sure enough, they showed up to Pizza Hut, and my dad went outside to try to talk them down, and my stepfather put him in a chokehold off of the ground, literally. And my dad was like, call the police, like, to his employees. And so at that point, all I remember is the police, my dad coming in and grabbing me and handing me off to the police. And they were like, you have to go. And that entire time, my mother was like, your dad is possessed by the devil. Like total manipulation, total narcissism, total covert narcissism. My mother. Like evil toward me, like hated me, but wanted to like mess with my mind. And I remember them dropping me back off and being so terrified that I was like, I can't do this. So my father decided to start the process of going for full custody. And at that point, I had one more visit, and well, two more visits probably out in California. They were stationed then out to California, Huntington Beach, and I had a blast. I mean, like, I loved my half-brothers. My half-brothers were like my brothers. They were twins. I had one other brother and then a new sister. And they were all half, but for me, I loved being like a little mom to them. And we would walk to the beach every day and like have fun. And then I always knew it was going to come, that my stepdad that night was coming home. And my mom, anytime he would call, he would like call to check up, right? And she'd get into a whispering voice. And I was always like, who is she turning into? Like, straight love addict. Straight codependent on him, but a narcissist to me. And they say, like, you're either one or another. And I agree with that, but then I've seen my mother be codependent on him and then narcissist toward me. And I remember my mother saying to me, quote, you're beautiful, except for the fact that you look like your father. And I'm going through puberty, and I'm like, really? Like, what? Why would she say that? You know, you're a little girl, and you're trying to look up to this narcissistic woman for love, compassion, to tell you you're beautiful, to call you sweet names, and that did not happen. And so from that point on, I remember them even making fun of me, like going through puberty and like pointing their finger and being like, look, she has to shave now. and laughing at me. And one time I remember we were forced to take naps, and I remember being so dehydrated that I went downstairs, and there was a mirror on my right side, and I had to go left to get water. Well, I see in the mirror, I tiptoed, because I knew, like, this guy's crazy. He is standing right here, and he's against the wall, and he's, like, glaring at me. Like, he was waiting to capture me. Like, waiting for me to sneak and, like, shame me or beat me. At that point, we were doing swimming lessons. I met this girl named Abby, and she was amazing, and her parents were amazing. Just so happened, like, her father was also from Pennsylvania, and we really clicked. And like, her family even brought me to, like, her auditions in LA. We would drive to LA, and I was like, oh my God, I totally want to do this. And I remember my mom being like, do you want to act? Okay, but wait, if you want to act, you have to live with me year round. And I'm like, oh, whoa, whoa, whoa. Like, I knew that it was manipulation. And so I knew. I was like, no, I'm not doing that. No. Because I knew in some ways that my dad had a more pure heart than she did. And that I was in danger with my mother because of my stepfather. And my mom would leave and go to be a nurse at the hospital when she got called in, and we would have dinner. And I remember one time, just me, my brothers, and my stepdad, and my brother was asked to say the prayer, and he had kind of a lisp and didn't, how kids grow up and they can't pronounce everything correctly. And he did not pronounce something correctly, and my stepdad rips him across the table and drags him into my room and beats him with a bat. So he's a clear psychopath at this point, I know for sure. And then another time, my other half brother, who was a twin, even younger, did not want to finish his food. He made him sit there for an hour. It's like, okay, after an hour, like, he's not hungry. Like, let him go. And instead, I'm sitting watching TV, and my stepfather rips him off of the chair, throws him with his arms behind his back, chest first, onto the ground, and starts to beat him with his belt. And he's like, and he looks up at me, and he's like happy about it. Like, he wanted to mess with my mind as he's beating his own kid. And I literally took the camera out and recorded it. And my mother saw me recording. She ripped it away from me and said, no, don't do that. And I had put it in my suitcase, the tape, and it was missing when I got back home. And sure enough, she sent it. And when she sent it, it was nothing but like that. Nothing. I got nothing. But I remember pulling my brothers to the side and saying, you did not do anything wrong. You did not do anything wrong. Whatever you do, don't turn out like him. And that was the last time I ever saw my mother, or I ever went to visit her. I went home, and that's when my dad full-fledged went for full custody. And when my mother found out, I had told my friend Abby, the young actress, I'd gone with her, and her mother was like, what's wrong? Are you okay? And I was like, yeah, I'm okay. And she kept digging, and I was like, And I was like, you have to promise you will not say a word. She was like, sure. No, I will not, I promise. And I told her, my stepdad is beating my brothers. And maybe she thought she was doing the right thing, and she didn't know what to do, but she confronted my mother, and my mother, I was back in Pennsylvania at my best friend's house. My mom calls my grandmother, finds out where I'm at, calls their house, and they're like, your mother's on the phone, and I'm like, and I go to the phone, and she just starts ripping me to shreds. And she's like, he's disciplining them. He's disciplining them. It's not abuse. You're a monster. She started just calling me all these horrible names, trying to gaslight me and tell me it's not abuse. Gaslighting, is when you see something and you know something's going on and that person's like, it's not going on. And so she tried to say, it's discipline. And she's like, you will never. Oh, and at the same time, she received my father's lawyer's write-up or serving somebody with papers about, hey, I'm going for full custody. You cannot just rip my daughter out and do whatever you want. And she freaked out. She was like, and you're a monster. You knew he was going for, you planned this. You knew he was going for custody. How dare you? She was like, you're like a time bomb and I never know when you're going to go off. And I'm like, hold up. I'm trying to save your own kids and you're not even trying to? But so that was the last time. My dad won, so he got full custody, and my mother said, I will never send you another birthday card, a Christmas card. You will never come out here and visit, which is totally narcissistic. She's totally love addicted, but she's so narcissistic and beating me down for the truth. And so at that point, I never saw her again at 12. It was done. And I remember then my grandfather at that point, her dad had attempted suicide, and then he had succeeded at committing suicide. And during that time at 12, I remember this really, really strong depression just coming over me. And I remember trying to tell my friends, a friend at school, and she turned her back on me. And that really hurt, and I began isolating. I was taking dance classes, and I stopped showing up for that, and I lost all my friends. I had gained all these friends, and then I lost them, and that was extremely hurtful. And my dad met this new woman. I remember another woman, because when I was little, they would take me to watch my dad play in bands. He plays the guitar, and he was amazing. He is amazing at it, and God bless him for that. But I would go, my grandparents would take me, and I would see, these drunken women just, all over the place, loving him and being, trying to deal with that. And at the same time at home, my dad's got all these